I'm Peter Rowan, and I'm from Australia, and I lived near Avatar's Road. I've done so for almost 40 years, and I suppose you're familiar with Avatar's Road, as Australians are familiar with Myrtle Beach. It's a place that Barbara inaugurated and gave its name to, and said it's one only of 3 places in the world for pilgrimage. Here, Myrtle Beach and Avatar's Abode. So I've lived there for many, many years. To tell my story about meeting Barbara, I must, of course, go back a ways, and there'll be a few digressions, but overall I'll have to give you a chronological line of thought, if I can, even though I'm very old, that will convey to you something of the immediacy and the relative permanence of those who do make contact with Meherabad. Nothing is by chance, nothing is even new, nothing is irrelevant. It is all relative to our ongoing, in the beloved's will and whim. It was in 1962 when I first heard about Barbara, end of 1962, through a man called Oswald Hall. Oswald was a marvellous intellect, and he had a love for Barbara, which was certainly not passive. It was totally and utterly outgoing, and irrespective of who you were, Meherabad is the avatar. No reticence. It's interesting, because when I met Oswald, you'll see the point of all this as the story progresses. Barbara had actually been to Oswald Hall's house in Australia in 1956. When Barbara, in 1956, that was the first time that Barbara visited Australia. I didn't know about Barbara then, not until the end of 1962. But Barbara visited Australia in 1956. He went to Sydney, and then those lovers of his in Melbourne, south of New South Wales, south of Sydney, about 1,000 kilometres south, wanted Barbara's darshan also, and Barbara agreed to go down there, and certain people, including Oswald and his dear wife Betty, offered their house to Barbara to stay at when he visited Melbourne. As it turned out, Barbara didn't stay at Oswald's house, but he made a point of visiting there, the same as he visited the other 3 houses he didn't stay at. Barbara was so gracious because people had offered with love for Barbara to stay at their house. He made a point of going there. So, I met Oswald, and even though I was spiritually inclined, at the time I was reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is the 60s, don't forget, and I was very much involved in what one might call the search. It was in a mixed gathering when I first met Oswald, and somehow we struck the right note. He didn't mention Barbara to me, but he did give me his phone number and said, when you come to up into my area, please give me a call, and I'd love you to visit me. So I said, okay. I never forgot him. Perhaps 3-4 months went by, and I found myself actually living not far from this man's place, who took a shine to me and I took a shine to him, and went and visited his house, and all around the wall was marvellous paintings of this man, Meherabad. And so we talked on till perhaps 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and this was the stories of Oswald's life. You could never escape him before about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I said to him before leaving, Oswald, give me one book which has absolute and utter meaning to you, which somehow is so totally relevant to your life that in giving it to me, you would not in the least feel ashamed of not displaying not just your deepest nature, but your deepest heart. He gave me Purdham's The Perfect Master, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, written by Purdham in 1933. Not the Avatar. Baba hadn't made his declaration in it was called The Perfect Master. So 3 a.m. I went home, and instead of going to sleep, I was highly enervated and began reading The Perfect Master. Within perhaps 6, 7, 8 pages, I knew that Baba was my master. I was his disciple. There was no doubt about it. No acceptance, no rejection. It just was. It was a fact of my life. I couldn't sleep, of course, for the rest of the night. The next morning, I rang Oswald and said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know who Meherabad is. He knows who I am. I belong to him. He said, I know that. So, of course, a very, very deep friendship then developed between Oswald and myself, totally in Meherabad. Now, this is 1963. In 1964, around about, there's one little thing I should say. In 1963, Oswald and I used to enjoy a beer at a hotel that was known as Joe Blow's Pub. And we'd have a beer together, very nice old-fashioned pub. And as I was about to get into his car, this is in 1963, end of 63, I said to Oswald, I'm going to be in India either next year or the following year. It was just a momentary revelation, let's put it that way. He went, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Forgotten. 1964 came around. And we received word from Baba, the West received word from Baba around about August, September of 1964 that he was going to give darshan from the 1st to the 6th of May in Pune for Westerners. For Westerners. Okay, so we all tried to get our act together, our money together. We're all going to go to, that is the Meherabad people in Sydney and in Melbourne, and we're all going to make the trek to Pune, to Guruprasad. Towards the end of 1964, Baba sent word that he was cancelling the Westerners' darshan from the 1st to the 6th of May, and it would be for Easterners only. People from India, Pakistan, Iran, etc. So, everybody dropped their bundle. I mean, you may have that expression in America, I don't know. But in Australia, everybody dropped their bundle and cancelled all the plans to go in obedience to Baba. Naturally, I understood perfectly what obedience was, and so I said to my former wife at the time, I'm 27 years of age at this stage, and my former wife was 23. I said, Helen, I still have the compulsion to go to India. I still feel that I want to go to India, but in absolute obedience to my beloved, not expect for 1 second to see him. Not for a moment, not for a moment did I expect to see him. I said, Helen, that's the name of my first wife, what I want to do is go to India and bow down to beloved Baba at the terms of the 5 perfect masters and travel India for a few months. She said, okay. She was just acquiesced and said, okay, that's fine, we'll do that if you want it. This is the 60s, we did those sort of things. And so I made arrangements. What I did, and you'll see the point of this again soon, I took a boat from Melbourne, which is almost the southern tip of the Australian continent. Melbourne, very deep south. We took a boat, which this will find interesting too. The name of the boat was the Roma. And it was the Italian Flottalura lines. If you're familiar with the name of Roma, Baba actually was on a boat in the 30s called the Roma on the Flottalura lines. Whether it was the same boat or not, quite often they're recommissioned. I've never found out. Anyhow, we took a boat up the east coast of Australia, up through Indonesia, across to Singapore, and on to Bombay. Now, I'll do a little digression here. Through the 30s and the 40s, Oswald Hall was in very close contact with Francis Brabazon in Australia. Oswald's father was the director of the National Gallery in Victoria. Oswald is a very fine artist, and Francis was actually working as a live model in the 30s at the gallery, and he and Oswald formed a friendship. So the friendship continued on over many years. And so without going into the ramifications of that, I just wanted to draw the connection between Oswald and Francis Brabazon. Now, Francis Brabazon, of course, as you know, moved to India at Baba's request in 1959 as one of the Mandali, and was there until 1969, until the time Baba dropped his body. So in that time, Oswald and Francis Brabazon were still in communication, with letters, with correspondence. My boat took 3 weeks to get to Bombay. I left on my birthday, the 5th of February. It arrived on Baba's birthday on the 25th of February and berthed in Bombay Harbour on the 26th morning. What happened? Before disembarking from the boat, the purser came to me and said, "Mr. Peter, Rowan, yes, I have a letter for you." A letter on the boat addressed to Peter Rowan, the Roma, Flottalura Lines, Bombay. I opened it, and it's a letter from Francis Brabazon to me. The opening of the letter is, "Baba was pleased to receive your greetings and will permit you to come to Pune on the 1st of May, 1965. The impossible had happened. I hadn't even stepped off the boat into India, and here's an invitation from my beloved Meherabad to visit him at the Eastern pre-darshan. The Easterners darshan, not for one moment did I believe or think or feel that I would see Baba. There was the letter. Now, I've mentioned before that my intention was to bow down to the 5 perfect masters. Baba in the 5 perfect masters. Part of the instructions from Baba in this letter was, do not visit any ashrams, any saints. You can visit Shirdi if you wish, or Babajan's tomb in Pune, but not the seat of Apasni Maharaj at Sequoia. I've never been, I've been to every other place. I've been to India many times, many times. I have never been to Sakoli, to the seat of Apasni Maharaj, because Baba never ever rescinded that order. So my intentions were shot to pieces. You see, we still had 2 months. This is the end of February that the boat arrived there, and it wasn't until the 1st of May that the darshan program was to take place. So we still had 2 months travelling ahead of us. But really what happened then, once I had this staggering news that Baba invited me to be there, the travelling was really only a preliminary to get to Pune. We went up to Kashmir, to places like Benares, Mount Abu, Ajmer, all these wonderful places that Baba had been to, and also so many of the places associated with the avatar, like Bodh Gaya and Nashik and Mathura, Vrindavan, all these places we visited. Eventually, we found our way back down to Pune. We booked into Dreamland Hotel near the railway station in Pune. It's still there, Dreamland Hotel, but then, let me tell you, it was hardly a dreamland. It was anyhow, but it was 15 minutes from Guruprasad. It was close to the railway station, all that sort of stuff. So, Francis Brabazon was then deputed by Baba to attend to our needs each day. So we would eat with Francis occasionally and things like that. Now what I must mention is this. Francis Brabazon is not the person to mince words, if you follow my drift. Francis Brabazon had an amazing intellect, a huge heart, but he didn't like what we might call chit-chat, or what he talks about in some of his poetry as tea talk. He didn't care for tea talk. I said, Francis, how is it that I had this great good fortune to be here, to be with Baba? Peter, if you're on the list, you're on it. I said, yes, Francis, but, I never expected for a moment to see Baba. Oh, that's why you're seeing him. That's what he was like. Francis was a difficult man in many respects, but like most of the Mandalay, difficult people, but the most wonderful souls. Totally 100% for Baba. So Francis was there. So the first came, the 1st of May, 1965 arrived. And the first day of the 1965 darshan program for Easterners was at Pune Centre, not Guruprasad. Pune Centre is a lovely, and for those of you who are familiar with it, know that Pune Centre has limitations when it comes to seating. Perhaps 250 people could be seated there. But being, I was going to say guests of honour, I don't know about that. But because we were different, Helen and I, we were placed in front of Baba, 2 rows back from the dais, where Baba is sitting here, 2 rows back, directly in front of him. The program was to start at 8 a.m. and go till 11:30 a.m. There must have been perhaps 3,000 people came to see Baba, and because of the limitations with the hall, there's an interior balcony at Pune Centre with access from a staircase from outside. And so several, perhaps 1,000 of these people, people passing by in front of Baba, but to get through the morning in this small space, so many people had to have Baba's darshan from the balcony. So Baba would like this and like that. The moment I saw Baba carried in on his chair, Baba at this time was in intense suffering. In 1965, Baba had been in seclusion right up until the time of the 65 darshan. So there should be just a slight digression here too, which I should have remembered a little while ago. What happened was, how did Francis Brabazon, I'm sorry about this, because you're waiting to hear about the first moment with Baba, how did Francis Brabazon get the information to Baba about me and Helen being there? Oswald had written a letter to Francis Brabazon, and because the boat took 3 weeks to get to India, there was time for the letter to get there. Now, there was a total embargo at the time on any correspondence from anybody. Baba was in total seclusion. This is February, we're still going back into February. Baba was in total seclusion. And Francis, if you've seen him in films, Francis usually wears a short sleeve shirt, usually white or light colour, with a pocket on either side. He had this letter in his pocket as he went into Mandali Hall at Meherabad. Total embargo on all correspondence. Baba was not hearing anything, he was not receiving letters, he would hear nothing from anybody unless it was totally or specifically specified by him. So Francis contrived to have the letter from Oswald in his pocket, his shirt pocket. Sticking out, of course, protruding out of his pocket. And as he went in for the morning's business with Baba, Baba said, "What's that?" "Oh, Baba, it's a letter from Oswald." "Oh, Oswald, how's Oswald? Good, good. Any good news?" Yes, Baba, his dear friend Peter and his wife from Australia are coming to India, and with no expectation whatsoever to see you, oh, I see, okay, look, read it to me. Francis read the contents to Baba, and Baba said, "You tell Peter I'm very pleased to receive his greetings and that I'll permit him to come on the 1st to the 5th of May 1965. So that's how then, because 3 weeks for the boat, how fortuitous that I took boat, not a plane. So that's how the letter was able to be written from Pune and arrive at the Roma ship and handed to me before I even got off the boat. Okay, so that fills in a little gap which may be now. Waiting for Baba in the Pune Centre. The Pune Centre had a very lovely atmosphere, and it was because the Pune Baba lovers invited Baba to give darshan on the first day there that Baba agreed. As simple as that. As soon as I saw Baba carried in on his chair, I wept. I simply wept and wept and wept and wept. Silent tears, just weeping, because what had happened? The impossible had happened. Here is a moment that all humanity longs for. Here is a moment of being with that beloved that all humanity must know at some time, that I never expected for one moment to see. And there I was, and there's Baba in front of me. So the tears kept falling. And then maybe, perhaps an hour, it was from 8:30 till 11:30, Erich came over to Helen and myself and said, Baba wants to see you now. Those of you who have seen the Ancient One film will possibly recognise Helen and myself. I look pretty much the same as I do now, except this was dark and this stuff was dark. And Helen was a diminutive, small girl, obviously Western with bouffant hair, but was in a beautiful pink sari. And Baba allowed us then to take his darshan. There's a very beautiful close-up of Helen and I in the Ancient One film, standing in front of Baba. I bowed down to Baba's feet. The longing, the unintentional tears were still there, but the depth of my longing to go to those feet was such that the moment of darshan was totally and utterly lost to me. I'll qualify that. When I say lost, I mean the absorption into the beloved's presence was such that this mental apparatus could not comprehend, nor wanted to comprehend, nor wanted to consciously know that moment of darshan, because my whole being was simply absorbed into that moment. I'm not being fanciful. This is not poetry. I mean it absolutely. That moment of darshan is a complete blank to me in my conscious life. At the time Meherabad Ki Jai, I say to that. Baba was so wonderful, so beautiful. So we sat there and sat there and sat there. But after the darshan program was over that morning, I felt totally and utterly exhausted. And this continued on for the 5 days, being with Baba. And I'd want to go back to the hotel after it finished at 11:30 and just, as we say in Australia, flake out. The next morning, the darshan program shifted to Guruprasad and did so for the next 5 days. Guruprasad was owned by the Maharani Shantadevi, as you know, and it was on huge grounds. There's a block of flats there now. And at the back of the Guruprasad bungalow was a huge ground, and the pandal was set up there. Now, at Guruprasad, there were huge iron gates at the front of Guruprasad. Because Helen and I were from Australia, and there were only, I should tell you, there are approximately 30,000 people from the East who actually had Baba's darshan, but there were 5 Westerners. There were 3 other Westerners apart from Helen and myself. That is Harry Kenmore, Ben Heyman, and Joseph Hart. 3 elderly gentlemen from America. I'm the only surviving male Westerner that met Baba at the 1965 darshan. I mention that just to put it into perspective, because a flyer said about my talk here that Helen and I were the only Westerners allowed to be there. At the front of Guruprasad, this is the 2nd of May now, the iron gates, huge double iron gates, were closed, locked, bolted and padlocked. A huge crowd of people were gathered at the gates, extending right down Bun Garden Road to get in. Helen and I were at the front. Now Helen, as I mentioned before, she was a diminutive 4'10", had the stature of a little girl. She was 23. As the gates opened, 2 very large Indian ladies fell on top of her and pushed her to the ground. Because with the throng of people there, the thrust of people to get in, to take their seats in the pandal was so great. I picked Helen up. She said, "What's going on, everybody? What's going on?" "I'm all right." And she dusted off her sari. She was okay. She wasn't injured. Within 5 minutes, one of the mandali came and said, "Baba wants to see you now." This is before the program started. This is at the gates. Helen and I were led over to Guruprasad bungalow, along the passage at the front to the left, where Baba's room was. Baba was sitting on his bed in his sadra. "Is everything okay? You okay?" He'd heard about the Helen going down. And Helen said, "Oh yes, Baba, this is wonderful. If I could see you again like this, I'd let it happen again, Baba." Along these lines, along those sort of lines. And Baba said, okay, everything's fine. We had Baba's darshan just after 7:30 in the morning at Guruprasad bungalow from the threshold of Baba's bedroom. The program started once again at 8 a.m. and went till 11:30. Those who came for Baba's darshan from all over India, Pakistan, Iran, were supposed to have Baba's darshan once only and go. But Helen and I were most fortunate because we're right in front of Baba, second from the front. Baba would always indicate, "Come and bow down to me." It must be remembered that This was the first darshan program that Baba gave where people were allowed to touch his feet. Up until then, at the East Gas West Gathering, Baba would embrace each one. But Baba said, this time I cannot embrace you, my lovers. I will allow you to bow down to my love for you. Also, at this gathering, Baba said there is not to be any questions, any answers. There's not to be any form of discourse. Just be here with me, receive my love, give me your love. That's all there is. There's no time for anything else. Remember, this is the last physical darshan program that Baba ever gave, because the Westernist program that was scheduled for December, Baba cancelled after May. So therefore, I became an Easterner for that time. Baba so each day we're able to take Baba's darshan, to bow to Baba. And the same feeling of total absorption took place, and the same feeling of total exhaustion took place after the darshan program. So Helen and I went back to Dreamland Hotel, and after lunch had a 40 winks. A knock came on the door. Sarosh Irani. This is around about 2 p.m. in the afternoon on Tuesday, the morning that we had Baba's darshan early, and also Baba's darshan at Guruprasad. Sarosh came in and said, Peter Rowan, Helen Rowan, Peter, Baba wants to see you now. You are to come and sit with Baba and the Mandali and some of the men, and Helen, you are to go and see Mera and spend the time with Mera. Helen, you're to spend time with Mera. I said, oh, okay. So we got in Sarosh's car, and he drove us to Guruprasad. This is the second day of my darshan. On the right-hand side of Guruprasad, there was a long veranda. You've seen it in the films if you haven't been there prior to it being pulled down. And at the end room was a room that became known as Mandali Hall. Just a small room. It was a bedroom. And there were double those fold doors, which we in Australia call French doors, I don't know, just double fold doors like that. Baba's chair was out from the wall, perhaps close to 2 meters, and the doors were over in that corner, and so for Sarosh and I to come into this room, we had to come in behind Baba. There was no more than about 20 men in this small room. Sarosh and I sat down behind Baba, so as not to intrude in any way. And Erich leaned over to Baba and said, Peter Rowan is here, Baba. Tell him to come to the front. So I got up and went towards the back, in a small room, found a cushion, sat down. This small room with Baba, the intimacy of this room with Baba, with just a few of the Mandali and some of the so-called group heads who had arranged for people to come from all over India to be with Baba, were there with Baba. But no questions, no answers, no discourse, just be with me, receive my love, give me your love. For the whole time that you were there, hardly anything was said. Baba's hands would simply lift gently off his armchair and come down in rhythmic gestures. Occasionally Baba would say to somebody, "How's your health?" "Oh, fine, Baba, I'm good, yeah." "And your family? Your family is okay?" "Yes." And then Baba looked at me and said, "Peter, when are you going home?" Immediately after the darshan program, Baba. Good. Baba was very happy with that. Subtly, if you understand, I knew my duty, that no hanging about, no travelling, nothing, just I was there for Baba. As I said, my travelling was really only a preliminary to see Baba. I had no desire whatsoever to do any more travelling. So I said to Baba, "Baba," immediately after the darshan program, very good. Baba was very happy with that. The feeling in this room, the intimacy of just being with Baba in a small gathering where nothing is being said, where the mental apparatus once again is not functioning like little scurrying lizards everywhere, and Baba, what about this and what about that? Everything was so wonderful, peaceful, quiet. And just a little Baba would say, "Okay." All eyes were on Baba. There was nothing to be said, nothing whatsoever. "Be with me, receive my love, give me your love." The refinement of feeling in this room with Baba, the fineness of texture, the sensitivity, the subtlety of expression of Baba with, how could I tell you, what you know, over the years, many people have said to me, "Did you have an interview with Baba?" And I found it very hard to say, no, I didn't have an interview with Baba, because there was no questions, no answers, no talk. He'd just be with me. But after about an hour, Baba said, "Okay, it's time to go." And Baba allowed everybody in the room, including the mandali, to bow. There's only 3 or 4 mandali there, to bow down to his feet and go out. But because I was at the back of the room, towards the back of this small room, I was perhaps the last one to leave. And as I bowed to my beloved's feet, I wept on those beloved feet, the most scalding, hot, boiling tears. It was as if all the filth and degradation of 1,000,000 lifetimes was pouring out on his feet. It was very, very painful. It was as if Baba's hand was pressing my head down through his feet with such a pressure that I couldn't move. But not only that, unintentionally, without any preconceived idea of what was going on here, my body was reverberating audibly with Baba, 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 and the tears are streaming on my beloved's feet. His hand is pressing my head, or the feeling of pressing my head deeply, deeply, deeply into his feet was there. The next moment, I found myself in front of Baba On my knees, of course, Baba was in his chair. On my knees, my body still holy, reverberating, Baba, 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 Baba. The tears still streaming. Baba's eyes seemed to come across a vast distance of time with the most unutterably loving expression of friendship, of generosity. He looked at me, and at that moment, Baba extended his hand and went like this to me. And back to himself. That moment was so painful, so excruciatingly loving, that I yelled out, "Oh!" That touch, of course, has never left me. That touch is a continuum. It's always there. Baba's nazar was on me. So if anybody said, "Did you have an interview with Baba?" all I can say is I had a moment in eternity with my beloved. At that moment with Baba, how could anybody want an interview? What did that say? Oh my dear dude. My heart was saying, my beloved, Baba, 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 Baba. So, there was my interview. Of course, after that, there were still 3 more days of my being with Baba. And the same, so perhaps you could understand the state that I was in. That to try and place yourself in that space of being so utterly and totally lost in the fact that I was there with Avatar Meherabad is impossible really to convey. But Baba's touch, Baba's immanence is always there, he's always with me. And no wonder I feel exhausted after seeing Baba, because relating to that moment with Baba, I feel it again and again and again, each time that I speak of it. How are we doing for time? Okay. Even though there were 3 more days with Baba, I think that should give you a perspective on my great good fortune in being there. If anybody has any questions at all, please, I'll be very happy to attempt to answer them.
I'd like to know, at the moment, first time you saw Baba's face, what you saw? What was in his face?
In his face, you mean the first day of darshan, at the first time I saw Baba's physical form? I can't say that I saw his face, his arms, his legs, or his feet, because Baba, the totality of Baba, was such that I could never dissect the parts. That is to say, the face, the grace, the movement of Baba was so total that his face and all of his being was, to me, just a one continuous association with my beloved. As I said, when I was kneeling in front of Baba, that's quite different, because I'm totally transfixed in the eyes of Baba. And then when his eyes seem to travel across all my lifetimes, a vast distance of time, and look at me, and then extend his hand, Baba's face was glorious. Glorious! The same as when I bow at Baba's feet. People say, well, what was touching Baba's feet like? I don't know. Because the absorption in my beloved, in his totality, was such that I never thought of parts. That's only my experience. Perhaps others will tell you their experience differently, but that's how it is. It's not a very good answer, I know, but anything at all, I'd be happy, because I must have missed a few things along the way. Yes.
How did you feel when you got home after this experience?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually. Totally alienated. When I returned home to Australia, I virtually locked myself away for a week, because I found that I don't wish to be unkind, but the West is the West. And to come from the atmosphere of Guruprasad and Baba's presence, the sense of alienation and of aggression in the air was such that I didn't want to see anybody or do anything. But after about a week or two, I thought, oh gee, I should really write to Francis Brabazon and thank him for being such a nice host and for arranging Rowan. So no, it was... But after a while, you get on with your life. The same after Baba dropped the body. I received a phone call, and I simply took myself off for several hours down to the beach and lay on the sand. But life has to go on. Continue. This must go on. So, but the important thing is that Baba has always been with me. Has never left me, will never ever leave me, and I'll never leave him, even though I may go away. Anything else?
What about Helen?
Thank you. Helen and I divorced, and Helen, I live up near Avatar's Abode, which is Queensland is the northern state of Australia, and Helen lives in Victoria still, down in Melbourne. And even though I don't have a great deal of contact with her, as far as I know, her heart is still with Baba. How could it be anything else? You know, I mean, I don't really, but that's what I think and know and feel. Excuse me.
Did she talk to you about her experience?
Not a great deal, because...
The question was, did she talk to you about her experience with Baba?
If I could try and put it in perspective, Helen, I was a very, very, very intense young Meherabad person, very intense. Helen, in a sense, came to Baba via me. Though Baba was very kind to her, she didn't really know a great deal about Baba, nor perhaps have the same degree or intense relationship that I had with Baba. but Baba was very kind to her. A few weeks before we left for India, she had the most wonderful dream where she was with Baba, and Baba led her up a very high mountain to the very top, and stood on the top of this very high mountain with her, and below the whole plains were illuminated. And Baba said, "This all belongs to me." So you see, Baba gave her that immediate, subjective knowledge of himself in her dream world. Isn't that wonderful? So she was able then to come to India with me, because mainly she was acquiescent to my ego, to my intense way of doing things and travelling all over and doing stuff and travelling third-class trains and, all that sort of stuff. So Baba gave her, it's a very good, thank you, that answered it quite well, yes. Yeah, so Helen she, as far as I know, she's still very much with Baba in her heart.
See, also, Helen, did you tell her about her experience with Meherabad? Because she met Meherabad when you went to Baba with me.
She spoke about it, but of course, when women get together, it's very much women's talk. And so the Mera and the women monthly dressed her up and put bangles on her and put sari, all that, and made her feel very comfortable. She was 23 years of age at the time. And so her experience with Mera was a very loving, wonderful person. The same with the other women mandali that were there. But I think she never, as far as I know, spoke in depth, and I don't want to speak for her. I don't want to put words into her mouth that perhaps I shouldn't. But she was very, very happy and taken with Mera. And a few years ago, she did actually write me a letter telling me of how she loved very much being with Mera and the women mandali and the time she remembers how lovely and sweet it was, like that. But one thing, if you like to, Helen, when she met Baba, the first time she met Baba, we had a 2-year-old son, Miles. She had a photograph which she gave to Baba. She said, "Oh, Baba, this is for you." And Baba touched it to give it back to her as a blessing. And Helen said, "Oh, no, I don't want it, Baba, it's for you." And Baba said, "Oh, okay." And put it aside. It was her expression of giving Miles, our 2-year-old son, to Baba. So you can see perhaps a little what she was like, which was very lovely.
Any more questions? Questions? You're welcome to talk to Peter after if you have anything quietly to ask him. But meanwhile, let's give him a big Jai Baba and thank you.
And thank you for having me, Karen. Karen was instrumental in, because I'm only spending 2 days in Naga, and then I'm back home on Tuesday. So, yeah, a very short trip. So, thank you so much. Avatar Meherabad ki jai, Avatar Meherabad ki jai, Avatar Meherabad ki jai. Jai Baba.